Have you tried building a complex UI in React and felt like your code is turning into a tangled mess? Don't worry, you are not alone. In this video, I will show you how to make your React component more flexible and organized using something called compound components. By the end, you will know exactly how to refactor messy code into a clean, maintainable structure. Let's dive in. So, what exactly are compound components? Think of them as a way to build more complex and flexible UIs by breaking them into a smaller, reusable pieces. Instead of having one giant component that does everything, you can split into a parent component and multiple child components that work together seamlessly. This approach not only keeps your code clean, but also makes it much easier to manage and extend. But before we start coding, let's make sure you have everything you need. You need Node.js installed on your machine, of course, and I recommend you using a code editor like VS Code that I'm using. Of course, you'll need React installed in your project, along with a basic understanding of React components. And if you are new to React, don't worry, I will walk you through everything step by step. Let's jump into the code now. So we are going to build a simple real chat application. First, I will show you this ugly code version, which is messy and hard to maintain. Then, I will show you how to refactor it using a compound component to make it much easier and much cleaner. Now, we have here a chat component, okay? And this chat component handles everything for us, displaying messages, sending new messages, and dealing with the real-time updates. The problem here is that it's all jumbled up together, making it hard to track and what is going on. So if you go deep into the code, you can see our chat component. It's having a state here, which stores the list of messages we are going to send. And then it have a function here that will handle the submission of our messages using the socket. Okay. And then we have two child components. One is for the window to display the messages, and the other one is the message input. And let me open the UI so you have better understanding. So this is the interface we are trying to build. So it is like a message box. Okay, so I can say hi, send, and should display it there. Okay, I am a coder and send. Okay, so this is the app we are trying to build. So we have the chat component, which is a wrapper around the whole thing. Then we have the messages component. Okay, and then we have the other component, which is the message input. Now, what is the problem here? We have few issues. The first thing is the prop drilling. Okay, so the messages here, the state messages and onSend function, which is right here, okay, are passed down through the props, which make it harder to manage as the application grows and scales in the future. The other problem is the tight coupling. This chat component is tightly coupled with the socket logic, as you can see here, okay, and making it very difficult to reuse and test it as well independently if you want to. The third problem is there is no separation of concerns. The socket event handling logic is mixed up with the chat component, okay? So usually you should not see these logics within your component. It will lead to a lack of clear responsibilities. So we'll not know which component is responsible for what. And the fourth issue is the redundant re-renders. The socket event handling inside this chat component might cause unnecessary re-renders and which will lead to a performance issues, okay? So maybe our app is small at the moment because this is a demonstration, but in real time, your chat applications are much more complex. And if you have this event of socket running on the top parent of your components, then you'll have a lot of issues of performance running only because the child components have to re-render. You can notice how everything is happening inside our chat components. It's handling the UI, the socket logic, and the state management as well, all in one place. And this can quickly become a nightmare to maintain, especially as the app grows. Now, let's refactor this into something more manageable. And we are going to break it down into chat window component for displaying messages, a message input component for sending the messages, and a socket provider. Okay, so we will add a socket provider to handle all the socket logic for us, and we will use the context API to manage the state and communication between these components. Let's create our socket context. So I'll go inside app, I'll create a new folder called context, and then I'll create a new file which is socket context.js. And right here, all what I will do, I'll just paste some code, because this video again is not about how creating a context or using context API. If you are new to this, please feel free to watch my video about context API. But what I will do, I'll go through this quickly. So all what we are doing is that we are importing context from React, okay? And we are creating our context. It's like we are creating this bucket which will hold some information for us, and then we will wrap our components with this bucket so they can access all the information inside the context API, okay? Then we are defining our socket provider. And this socket provider will be the parent wrapper around all our components. And in here, we're creating internal state, okay, for messages. And then we are defining the sockets because we'll be using the socket here. And then we are defining these functions, okay? Send message function, and all what it does, it takes the text which the user writes, okay? And create a new message with an ID and the text, and then append that or add it to our message state. And then we are emitting a socket with a send message, and we are adding the new message to it. Accessing this function using context API directly from our input component. We don't have to do any prop dealing to access it. The next thing here is we have a use effect. Okay, and the use effect, what it does, it just emit the receive message, okay, for our new messages, and it makes sure it turns off the socket whenever this receive message is triggered, and the whole use effect is triggering every time this socket being triggered. Okay, why we're doing that? So whenever the user writes something in the input field and hit send button, I want my component to re-enter so it pick up the new messages. Okay, so that will happen, of course, whenever the socket is being triggered, and that's why we are listening to that in the use effect. Okay, and then we are accessing the socket context we created right there, and you do dot provider, so you have that wrapper bucket ready for you, and it accepts a property value by default, and then you give here whatever elements you want to access from your child components. So I know I want to access the messages because I want to display them on the UI, and I want to access this function because that will be the one triggering when I hit the send button. Okay, and then here you have your child component. And now here in the line 33, all we're doing is that we are defining a custom hook that we are creating that will help us to access this context that we created from our child component, okay? Without have to rewrite some code again and again. Again, if this is really overwhelming and you feel it's too much for you, feel free to watch the depth tutorial I created about the context API and the custom hook. And now what I will do here, I will do a small change and I want you to see me doing it so I can explain it for you. So what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to access the context we created because we need to access it from our child component so we can access the message directly from there. And same for my message input. I don't want to have this on send on the prop, okay? That's why we're doing the whole change. I want it to access directly from my context. So what I want to do, this chat window, a component, and the message input, I want to enforce them that to be only used within this context, okay? They have to be child of this context all the time to be able to be used. So in here, I'll define a const. I'll create context as a equal. Then I'm assign this context that I created up there. Okay. Then if by mistake, if someone try to access the child component from somewhere else other than the chat component, which is wrapped within our context, I want to give an error because this context will not exist if they try to do so. So I'll add an error here. I'll say if context doesn't exist, I'll just throw an error, new error, and we can pass here any message you like. What we say is that socket context must be used within the chat components, for example. Okay, you can add any message you want, and then here, if the context exists, then I'll just make it available for me. Great. So here, this is your custom hook to access your socket context within your child components. Okay, so it helps you keeping track of the changes we are doing. So, and here we created your context to handle state management and sockets. And I'll just fix my spellings, handle and management. Great, okay. So I hope this makes sense. So firstly, we created this context, our bucket. All our state will be there and handling all the socket calls will be all done there. So all that messy things, which is the logic of your component, will be moved right here. Then after that, we created a custom hook that will help us access all these details in our bucket, okay? So our child components don't have to manually go every time and access by themselves, but we create a function they can just trigger, which is our custom hook, and have the details ready for them, okay? Now, this is great. Now let's go back to our chat component. And what I will do, I'll import the custom hook we created. Okay, so use socket. Let me make sure that I export it here. Yeah, use socket. So I need to be inside a curly bracket from, oops, from, and let's access it from our context slash socket context, okay? Usually the custom hooks have to be in separate file, but just to keep it simple for you today, I'm keeping it in the same file as my context file, okay? Now, we imported our use socket. Now we can access whatever we want. For the chat window, we only need to access the messages. So I'll come right inside my component here. I'll say const, okay, and the value or the name I will give it is messages. So I'll say messages, okay, equal use socket, and I'll save that. Okay, now this is complaining because it says it have a type of any, and I can fix it. And what I can do, I define the type of message here. So I'll just import it again. I think by mistake I removed it from my chat component. Okay, and then this one I can say type of message. Okay, now all is happy. I can go back to my chat component and I will remove this because we're not passing prop anymore. Next thing, I will go to the message input and I will have to do again the same things as well. Okay, so I'll come right here, import my custom hook, import use socket. Oops, use socket. And we can come right here. We don't need this prop to be passed anymore as well. And I'll come right here. I'll access whatever values I need to access. So I think for this component also we just need to access not only the function, okay, which is send message. So I'll just copy that to avoid any spelling mistakes. And I'll say equal to use socket. Great. Now, few other changes we have to do is here. So we have to replace this one with the one we imported from our custom hook. So send message, and that should be, that's it. Easy peasy. Okay. Now we can go back to our chat components and we remove this lane as well. Now we are done with refactoring our child components, but still we didn't do one thing. So the child components, they are trying to access our context, right? In like here, but we said that these child comps have to be wrapped within this bucket, okay? So we didn't do yet. And that's where we created this socket provider. So we have to go to our chat component and wrap these with that socket provider. So I'll go right here, I'll say import socket provider, okay, and we'll import it. And then I'll come right here and I'll just wrap my child component within my socket provider. Oops. So I'll just do move the child components inside. Okay. And now this looks great and much better than before. So we have to do some refactoring also. So we don't need all these things now. We can just remove them. It's all done within my socket provider. I don't need this one here as well. And I don't need this. I don't need that. Amazing. You can see now your chat component, it's much cleaner and much better to read. And all that detangled logic has been moved out and our component only is doing what it has to do, which is rendering your child component. That's it. Now let's go back to our UI and test if this is still working. I'll hard refresh to be sure. I'm saying hi, click send. There we go. It's still working. I am a coder. There we go. It's working. Let's do some a quick recap. Okay, so what we have done is we created the socket context, okay, where we moved the socket logic into this separate file using context API. Okay, and this keeps the socket management and the message state as well isolated from our UI components. The socket provider that we created right there, okay, wraps the application and provide the messages and send messages functions to any components that need them through the context. And the use socket that we created right there, which is our custom hook, is created so it's easily access this socket context within our components. Now, the decoupling components, the chat window and the message components, so the child components right here, are no longer relying on the prop drilling. Instead, they consume the socket, okay, like here we're doing line 5, directly using this use socket hook. So this decouples the components, making them more reusable and easier to test as well, which is amazing. The next thing is that the separation of concern. The refactored code now separates the socket logic from our UI, and you can see it clearly here. Your chat component now is much cleaner and much more readable. There is no logic here regarding any sockets or regarding any state. Okay, so the refactored code now and the UI components, chat window, and the message input are now purely responsible for rendering and interacting with the user, while the socket provider now we created right there handles the real-time communication for our application. The next thing is that we improve the reusability and maintainability. So the chat window component and the message input, okay, are now purely responsible for rendering and interacting with the user, while the socket provider handles the real-time communications. The next thing, the improved reusability and maintainability. So the chat window and the message input components are now can be used in other parts of the application or even in different projects with a minimal modification. The code is easier to maintain as each component has a clear and focused responsibility, which is more displayed in the UI. Now that we have refactored the code, here are some tips to keep in mind, okay? So first, always try to separate the concerns in your components. Let each component handle a specific responsibilities. Second, using the context API can help you avoid prop drilling and make your code more modular. And finally, when you are building complex UIs, consider breaking them down into a smaller components like we did right here. Now, you may run into some common issues implementing this pattern. One is handling state management between the components, okay? Especially with real-time data like chat messages. If you notice that your components are re-rendering too often, double check your use of context API, okay? Right here. And make sure you are not intentionally causing unnecessary updates. And also be careful with the dependency array, like we have here in lane 25, and make sure the use effect is having whatever dependency is needed and it's avoiding the infinite loops. You don't want to fall in that, okay? Now, to conclude this video and to wrap up, we have taken a messy, tightly coupled chat application. We refactored into a clean, maintainable structure using compound components. We have separated the logic, improved the organization, and made our code easier to extend in the future. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and that you are excited to start implementing compound components in your own project. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more React tutorials. I would love to hear your thoughts or any questions in the comment section below. If you are ready to take your React skills to the next level, check out my other video on advanced React patterns. Thanks for watching.